Greetings to fellow built environment practitioners, students, and everybody who's joining us today. I would like to extend my special greeting to the CEO of the CIDB, Mr. Bongani Dladla, and also extend my special greetings to the Honorable Deputy Finance Minister for the Republic of South Africa, Mr. 𝗘𝘅𝗰𝗲𝗹𝗹𝗲 𝗪𝗂𝒂𝒂. We feel honored to have you at this webinar today. Once more, thank you all for taking your valuable time to join us at this webinar today. The webinar is themed Rebuilding South Africa's Construction Industry, and it is hosted by the 𝗏𝗏𝗃 Sustainable Construction Growth Research Center in collaboration with the Construction Industry Development Board of South Africa. With all protocol observed, my name is 𝗘𝗅𝗰𝗲𝗪𝗂𝗪. I'm a lecturer at Wits University School of Construction Economics and Management, a PhD researcher at the Wits CIDB Center of Excellence for Sustainable Construction Industry Growth. I'm also a professional quantity surveyor with the Quantity Surveying Council of South Africa. I'll be the program director for today's 3-hour webinar, which brings together thought leaders, experts, and industry stakeholders to unpack strategies for sustainable growth, improve procurement practices, and efficient project delivery. The program is divided into 2 segments. We have the first segment, which will cover purpose of the webinar, welcoming message, opening address, keynote address, and then we'll have our Q&A session. We'll also be moving on with our second segment, which will have panel discussion on key issues affecting the construction industry, covering procurement, covering project management, and covering sustainable growth. Lastly, we will wrap up the webinar with a summary of the key points, vote of thanks, and closure. I'm excited today to introduce our incredible speakers who are committed to the growth of the construction industry, and they're also change makers within their various fields. We have Professor David Root, who is the head of school for the School of Construction Economics and Management at Wits University. We'll then have Mr. Bongani Dladla, CEO of the CIDB South Africa. We then have the Honorable Deputy Minister of Finance for the Republic of South Africa, Mr. 𝗘𝗅𝗰𝗲𝗪𝗂𝗃𝗏. Then we'll have our keynote address by Professor Roger Flanagan, who is an emeritus professor at the University of Reading in the UK. For panelist discussions, we're going to have Mr. Nonkululeko Singane, who is the CEO of 𝗪𝗠𝗂𝗧 Company, Mr. 𝗂𝗂𝗅𝗕𝗂𝗂𝗧 𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗂 have Mr. 𝗘𝗅𝗕𝗄𝗅𝗍𝗂, who is the Commercial Director at Lubicon Group. We'll have Mr. Lufuno Ratiku, who is the President of the SACP MP. And then we'll have Mr. Zamagera Zungu, who will be the moderator of the panel discussion, and Mr. Upasna Narain, who will be doing the summary and vote of thanks and closure. Please feel free to engage and participate throughout this webinar with our speakers by utilizing the Q&A chat box below. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, who is the head of School of Construction, Economics and Management at Wits University, to do the purpose of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our digital hands together for Professor David Root. Over to you, Prof. Root.
Thank you, Ksholofelo. Good morning, everyone. Just a couple of corrections. I'm not the head of school. I'm the acting head of school. I'm also the acting director of the CIDB Centre of Excellence for the moment. So I'm only in a temporary stand-in position at the moment. But I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar. This is the first formal activity as part of the CIDB Center of Excellence that is hosted at the University of 𝗤𝗏𝗪𝗏. It's one of two, the other one being down the road at the University of Johannesburg. And so I'd like to thank the CIDB and particularly Dr. Ntebo and the CEO for this initiative in terms of providing support to research within the South African built environment. I'm very pleased to see the lineup of speakers today. I think today is a particularly, or the current time is a particularly interesting one. The topic of this is the rebuilding of the South African construction industry. And I think the title is apt because if we look at the South African economy, it has pretty much been stagnant for the last 10 or so years. And that means the construction industry as well has not grown particularly over that period. In fact, it's probably declined as a percentage of GDP. There has been a lack of the level of investment that this country requires into fixed investment to seriously grow our economy and deal with our challenges of poverty, inequality, and high unemployment. So I'm very pleased to see the speakers lined up, particularly the Deputy Minister for the National Treasury, or Deputy Minister for Finance, rather. It must be an interesting time for him, but there is that Chinese curse of living in interesting times, and I think we all are living in interesting times. But the topic area in terms of the construction sector, and particularly the contracting sector within the larger construction industry, is one that I think is quite important. We do seem to be having a significant change in the structure of the industry. That's reflecting the workflow that's going into the industry and how the industry is organizing itself to respond to that. That's leading to certain challenges in terms of the larger construction firms, and in the absence of large projects, perhaps the rationale for large construction firms falls away to a certain extent. So how the industry is going to adapt and change and hopefully take advantage of new opportunities as they arrive is one that I'm looking forward to listening to. So I'll hand you over to Shola Fellow, who's going to introduce, I think, to our first keynote speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Root. I'm also looking forward to the speakers and the discussion topics, which are very interesting. Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce our next speaker, who is the CIDB CEO. After graduating from the University of KZN with a Bachelor of Science in Engineering in Civil Engineering cum laude, Bongani Dladla went on to obtain his Master of Philosophy in Engineering for Sustainable Development at the University of Cambridge in the United Kingdom. In his career as a civil engineer, Mr. Dladla has dedicated himself to the construction industry, learning the construction business from the ground up. He is a recognized leader with broad experience in managing complex programs, public sector procurement, and digital innovation. He is dedicated to creating an environment of accountability, transparency, and consensus building. One of his most treasured pastimes is meeting people with good ideas and exploring how to put them into practice. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our digital hands together for Mr. Dladla, who will be giving us the welcoming message. Over to you, Mr. Dladla.
Thank you, colleagues. I hope you are well. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues, partners in the industry, in academia and government, and a special welcome and greetings to the Honorable Deputy Minister of Finance, Mr. 𝗔𝗍𝗄𝗏, who is also a graduate of this great institution, and also thank the acting head, Professor Root, for the kind welcome, and our keynote speaker, Professor Flanning from the University of Reading. I would also like to extend a special greetings to our former board chairperson, Ms. Nonkululeko Sindana, who is also a titan of this particular industry, and also all our panelists that have gathered today. It's really a pleasure for me to welcome you at today's webinar that is hosted by the Wits University's Center of Excellence themed Rebuilding South Africa's Construction Industry, which really aligns very well with the Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure's call and the President's call on turning South Africa into a construction site. So we have to do that in a manner that will actually ensure long-term sustainability of the construction industry. I want to begin by thanking the University of the Witwatersrand for their ongoing partnership and for convening this timely and important engagement, and the speakers and panelists that have taken their time to contribute towards this critical conversation. I would like to also highlight the special role that the CIDB Center of Excellence, which serves as a long-term collaboration between the CIDB representing the industry really in general and the University of Witwatersrand. The center is not just an academic exercise where we publish books and papers that have no contribution towards really the development of the industry, but it's really a long-term strategic partnership that is focusing on practical outcomes and on building a stronger, smarter, and a more capable construction industry. And I think in the best of times for the construction industry, with the confidence that is also improving, it's proving to be an important time for the South African construction industry to also have such partnerships. The research and work that is centered around the key performance levers of procurement, program management, and project management will play a significant role into turning this research into policy and taking that into practice, and helps us with evidence-based, future-focused solutions for the sector, which are much needed for the sector to contribute meaningfully to our socio-economic development as a country. As many of us know in this call, the South African construction industry is at a crossroad. It has long been a driver for job creation and infrastructure development, but it has also struggled under the weight of underinvestment, project delays, corruption, and inconsistent delivery. And this was amplified by the pandemic of COVID-19, but this now gives us an opportunity to reflect on those and take lessons learned on that, and also build better in our endeavor to meaningfully turn South Africa into a construction site, and a construction site that will deliver investment and create jobs and ensure that we can accelerate our service delivery. At the Construction Industry Development Board, we see our role not only as a regulator, but also as a catalyst for industry inclusive development, professionalism, and inclusive growth. And I think the construction industry has proven over and over again. You know, if it were up to me, Deputy Minister, the entire budget of the state would be dedicated to infrastructure development, because it will solve many of the other problems as people get employed. There's active economic activity in the country, but we still have other social programs that we need to fund. We are actively working to improve the compliance and ethical practices in procurement, which also will ensure that we get value for money, but also do it in an inclusive way, support emerging contractors and enterprises, and build the skills and the capability of the construction industry workforce. And we take that beyond also just the construction industry workforce, but also the infrastructure clients, because when we, and I'm sure some colleagues will reflect on this, a procurement for infrastructure is quite a unique endeavor where you see real value for money by looking at it as a system. So we also are focusing on also capacitating, ensuring that we have a capable client, informed client that can deliver on infrastructure and the complexities that it comes with. We need to modernize systems for better projects and contract management, and also promote resilience and sustainability in infrastructure development. The need to rebuild our industry requires strong partnerships between government, academia, business, and communities, and that can really a webinar of this nature. I was quite very happy to see also the participants that they actually cover the whole spectrum of those partners that we need in order to build a strong construction industry. So looking at today's sub-themes of procurement, contracting, and program management lies at the heart of the performance of the sector. Procurement must go beyond price to ensure value for money transparency, innovation, and inclusion. The CIDP is refining the procurement frameworks, or we are contributing to the regulations that are being developed to ensure that there's more consistent and outcomes-based delivery. We, as a CIDP, have a vested interest in this endeavor because we know the cost I'm sure my good friend here will also note that, the cost to businesses when there's inconsistencies in the construction industry. I'm sure President of SACPMP will also attest to that, and also Messindan, where we do need to standardize on those, but in a developmental manner. And contracting practices, they must be modern to ensure that we better manage the risk and also take away the aspect of a total outsourcing of a risk that clients tend to do, making sure that it is balanced, that the best person who can manage that risk is the one that is assigned that risk. Because when we totally outsource risk in contracting, we tend to increase cost and it works against service delivery. We need to improve fairness and to reflect on South Africa's developmental agenda. A clear, standardized contract helps to reduce disputes and delays. And we go beyond that as a CIDP, which is why we are so interested in the human capital development of the industry, because we also need to capacitate in ensuring those contracts. Project management really remains a glue that holds all of these things together, from planning to execution to closeout, and a strong project leadership and governance are essential for infrastructure success, as it has been proven over and over again. So we need to really professionalize the project delivery and invest in capabilities and not only just systems. In closing, I really encourage all of us in this webinar to use the space as a safe space for honest dialogue, bold thinking, and practical collaboration. The pathway to rebuilding our construction industry is complex, but it is not impossible. It requires a shared vision, accountable leadership, data-driven decision-making, and more importantly, we act. So let us take this opportunity to move ideas into implementation together. Once again, being here, I look forward to the discussions and also to see how better we can also support academia in our endeavor to have more evidence-based policy formulation that really helps us solve our socio-economic challenges as a country. And again, thank you to the Deputy Minister for taking the time from his extremely busy schedule to address this particular gathering. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. 𝗙𝗪𝗪, for such a warm, welcoming message and for emphasizing the need for industry and academia to collaborate so that we can work towards resolving and addressing the current challenges that the construction industry is facing. In Setswana, which is my home language, we normally use a saying that goes by 𝗔𝘅𝗵𝗔 𝗔𝗿, which in essence is loosely translated as the dogs are tied up. So please feel free to engage with us by utilizing the chat box. We value your feedback, we value your questions, and all of that. So in moving on with our program, responsible for the opening address, ladies and gentlemen, let's put our digital hands together for the Honorable Deputy Finance Minister of the Republic of South Africa, Mr. Asho Sarupin. Over to you, Deputy Minister.
Thank you very much, Solofelo, and good morning to everyone who has joined us. It's a privilege to be able to address you today on rebuilding the South Africa construction industry, and it's a privilege to be speaking at WITS, where I picked up 3 degrees. So certainly I'm not a stranger to that campus and really think fondly of my time back at WITS. The construction industry is a sector that not only builds our physical environment, but also shapes our economic and social landscape. And so we've got to start reimagining the sector because it's one that is critical to our country, but it is at one of its most daunting crossroads after the last 15 years of low growth. So let's be clear from the outset that the story of the construction industry in South Africa is a broader mirror to the kind of journey our country has undergone, from heights of ambition and development through periods of exclusion and injustice into a future that must be defined by opportunity. If we look back to the historical foundations of the construction industry in the early 19th century, we see that infrastructure projects were synonymous with national progress. The expansion of Cape government railways during the colonial period was not merely about laying steel tracks. It was linking disparate regions, enabling trade, and of course, consolidating state control. Similarly, the gold rush and the Witwatersrand was more than a geological revolution. It triggered a wave of urbanization that demanded housing, roads, waterworks, and transport networks. And so construction has always been for South Africa the beating heart of modernization. Our major cities grew not just because of the geography of their politics, but because of the industry that made them habitable and functional. In fact, I believe Johannesburg is the largest city of its kind in the world that's not built in a body of water. In the 20th century, landmark projects like the Ghariep Dam, national highways, and stadiums illustrated that our construction industry had capacity to drive change. These achievements showed that construction was a critical path to mobilizing capital, technology, and human resources in the service of public good. However, I must take a moment to acknowledge that there was a parallel history of exclusion. The growth of our infrastructure was underpinned by systemic discrimination. For example, the 1951 Native Building Workers Act allowed Black workers to be trained in skilled trades, but prohibited them from being employed in those capacities on white sites. That policy, and many others like it, relegated Black South Africans to menial labor despite their skills and reinforced economic marginalization. I raise this historical context not just for its academic history, but because it does have implications for equity and skills distribution and trust within the sector. So going forward in the sector, we must do so with a commitment to right these historical wrongs with measurable actions around skills development and inclusion. Now, if we fast forward to the post-apartheid era, we find an industry that, despite moments of brilliance, has been beset by a combination of neglect, mismanagement, and external shocks. In the early 2000s, there was a major construction resurgence linked to the 2010 FIFA World Cup. Infrastructure development was prioritized, stadiums and accompanying infrastructure was built, and there was a sense of momentum in the industry. But this momentum was not sustained. From 2010 onwards, investment in infrastructure began to taper off, and we see that in the GDP numbers. A combination of macroeconomic pressures, public sector inefficiencies, and reduced capital expenditure started eroding our construction sector's vitality. Many state-owned enterprises, which were traditionally key clients for construction, became embroiled in corruption scandals and financial instability. Procurement became slow, less transparent, and frequently politically manipulated. And we have volumes of the Zondo Commission report that show us that. COVID-19 was another body blow. During the pandemic, construction sites were shut down, supply chains disrupted, and investor confidence shaken. Smaller firms folded, larger ones staggered. Projects halted midstream. The human cost in terms of lost jobs, livelihoods, and hope was immense. Even more telling is the fate of our once mighty construction firms. Murray & Roberts, a construction name synonymous with engineering excellence, filed for business rescue. This followed the collapse of our other giants like Group 5 and Basil Reed. These were not just business failures. They were signs of an economy in distress. And behind each of these corporate headlines is a trail of unpaid subcontractors, abandoned projects, and communities left in limbo. And the ripple effects of these failures are felt across our economy, from steel manufacturers to cement producers, from transporters to retailers. So we need to be candid about the challenges of public infrastructure spending. Budgetary allocations at our metros and municipalities and in critical infrastructure departments have shrunk or become inconsistent. When funds are allocated, there are bottlenecks in planning, tendering, and execution that delay implementation. At the National Treasury, we've attempted to stimulate infrastructure by spending through the infrastructure fund and budget facility for infrastructure to make sure that shovel-ready projects actually are not blocked by slow and encumbered by administrative red tape. Of course, we're not here to mourn an industry's decline. We're here to chart its rebirth. So despite these challenges, I think the construction industry does remain one of our most potent levers for economic growth. In South Africa, studies have shown that for every R1 invested in construction, the economy can benefit by up to 2.84 rands in multiplier effects. That's not just the theory, that's the impact. And when you consider that government's consumptive expenditure has a negative multiplier, it shows you that we need to shift government expenditure from consumption to investment. And the best investment we can make is in infrastructure. And construction is inherently labor intensive. It creates jobs, not just for engineers and architects, but for bricklayers, carpenters, plumbers, truck drivers, and security personnel. It helps us employ as many people as possible in an economy suffering with structural unemployment and large amounts of unskilled labor. So it can become an engine for inclusive employment. It also lays the literal foundation for other economic sectors. You cannot run an effective school without a classroom. You can't provide healthcare without clinics and hospitals. You can't boost tourism without functional airports and roads. You can't expand manufacturing without factories and logistics hubs. So infrastructure is the bedrock of every other form of economic activity. So importantly, construction can be the gateway to development here, and especially to small business development. Subcontracting, enterprise development programs, and so on offer real opportunities to broaden economic participation, especially for historically disadvantaged communities. But of course, these opportunities must be structured and supported. One of the more insidious threats to progress in the industry today is the rise of so-called construction mafias. What began as calls for local inclusion have morphed into organized extortion. Armed groups, often claiming to represent local business forums, invade sites, halt work, demand a share of contracts, and intimidate workers. These are not isolated incidents. They're part of a systemic pattern that threatens to collapse the fragile trust between contractors, communities, and clients. According to industry estimates, more than 63 billion rands worth of projects were affected by construction-related criminal activities in 2019 alone, and that number grows every year. So I do want to say that the demand for community involvement in projects is legitimate, but extortion is not. Site invasions are not. Violence is not. These actions increase costs, cause delays, and most tragically, result in injuries and loss of life. They deter investment, both domestic and foreign. They contribute to unemployment and underdevelopment, the very problems they claim to be against. And here government is acting decisively. Last year, we had with the CIDB and the DPWI a summit on the construction mafia, and there has been a tremendous amount of work done with law enforcement and intelligence coordination to increase prosecutions in this space. But it also requires the industry to reflect. Are the community engagement strategies adequate? Is there sufficient transparency about how local contracting and subcontracting is done? Are timelines, budgets, and community participation opportunities communicated clearly? If we want communities to be partners and not saboteurs, we must treat them as such from the outset. So how do we rebuild? How do we turn this battered but vital industry into a vehicle for national economic growth? Firstly, as I've said, we need stronger law enforcement. This means not just policing, but intelligence-led investigations, asset seizures within the criminal networks, and intergovernmental task teams such as the one undergo that treat infrastructure protection as a national priority. Secondly, we need policy reform, and the National Treasury has produced reforms for public-private partnerships to speed up infrastructure development, and we will be doing a similar exercise for local government in the coming months, because procurement systems need to be overhauled to prioritize efficiency, transparency, and fairness. Bid adjudication committees must be shielded from political manipulation, and payment systems must be reformed to ensure that subcontractors are paid on time. Thirdly, we have to deepen public-private partnerships. We all know that the fiscus is in a tight space, and of course, being the Deputy Minister of Finance, I can't not acknowledge that we're in a budget impasse at the moment. But the truth is, governments cannot fund the infrastructure backlog alone. The private sector has the capital, expertise, and risk tolerance, but we need to provide predictable policy, fair returns, and a commitment to de-risking investment. Fourthly, we must invest in skills development. The future of construction includes digital tools, green building techniques, and complex project management. Our workforce must be ready. This means our TVET colleges must partner with industry bodies and create the right pipelines that are funded, structured, and outcomes-based for the future of the industry. Fifthly, we must embrace technological innovation. Building information modeling, or BIM, drone-based surveying, prefabricated modular construction, all of these tools can reduce costs and improve efficiency. But adoption requires, of course, education, investment, and support. Sixth, we must build community trust. From project conception, communities must be consulted and not just informed. They must understand how they benefit from the project itself, not just from the potential opportunities. And where possible, local labor and local supply should be prioritized, but with clear conditions, oversight, and quality control. And lastly, we must ensure financial sustainability. Government must pay its bills on time. Cash flow is the oxygen for the construction industry, and we know that late payment kills companies, stalls projects, and erodes morale. The Treasury is doing its bit, but provinces and municipalities must institutionalize payments, timelines, and penalties. So, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I think that rebuilding South Africa's construction industry is not just a technical task when you look at its multiplier effect. It's a national imperative. It's about jobs for the present, justice for the past, and the foundations for the future. So we need to move from paralysis and decline to progress, from conflict to collaboration, and from decay to dynamism. So I'm hoping that we can leave here today with a sense of a shared mission, that we must rebuild this industry in a promise of what it can become for the future and the contribution it can make to our economy. And I think we can build a sector that is inclusive, transparent, and competitive, one that builds structures and dignity and hope. And that is the future I hope we can construct together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to the Deputy Minister, and thank you for emphasizing that rebuilding the construction industry is a joint effort which requires all of us to participate. Thank you also for painting a picture of the current status of the construction industry and outlining key initiatives that we can take to ensure that we rebuild the country. So in moving on with our program, for the keynote address, I'd like to introduce a distinguished academic and industry leader in construction management. He is an emeritus professor at the University of Reading in the UK, who holds honorary and visiting professorships at various universities in China, Malaysia, and Australia. He has held board and advisory roles in different countries, including South Africa. He has extensively contributed to the construction management practices by writing books, journal publications, and championing leadership and innovation initiatives. Through his leadership, research, and industry engagement, he continues to shape the future of the construction management worldwide. Once more, ladies and gentlemen, let's put our digital hands together for Professor Roger Flanagan to do the keynote address. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much for a lovely introduction. I feel very privileged and very proud. Thank you. What I want to do is take a journey with you. And I'm going to share my screen. And what I want to think about is how you as a country do transform the industry. I'm going to go very fast because I've only been given 30 minutes, but let's just try and think about where you want to go, how you're going to get there, and what's going to happen. And so let me share the screen. the presentation. And basically, I've used the term international best practice, but you're on a journey, a smart journey. And that journey is going to be a tough one at times, but an exciting one. And so what I want to do today is to basically make you think about smart projects in South Africa, what you can learn from best practice, how you've got to be prepared to challenge conventional thinking, because at the end of the day, you need innovation. You need innovation to give you that transition. And so what I'm sure at the moment you're feeling, well, I'm quite full of ideas. It's early in the day. But really what you're thinking about is, I was very struck by your Deputy Minister's presentation there, and I thought it was absolutely brilliant. What ideas can we apply to South Africa? And the thing is, you want answers, but there aren't answers because you have them. It's just the start of a conversation which is dependent upon you. You're the people who are going to make that change, make it happen, and go forward. So I think there are 4 quotes that are worth remembering at the moment. And it was Albert Einstein. He said, you can't solve problems with the same thinking that was used to create the problem. And again, how true that is. And then Charles Darwin, in the theory of evolution, he said, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It's the most adaptable to change. And then there was Lewis Carroll in Alice in Wonderland. Alice was lost. She was in the forest. And she looked up to the Cheshire Cat and said, would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here? She asked. That depends a great deal on where you want to get to, said the cat. I don't much care, said Alice. And it doesn't matter which way you go, said the cat. Well, that again is true. You've got a sense of direction. The Deputy Minister was very clear and the CIDB CEO was clear. You've got to change, you've got to move on, and things are going to happen. And lastly, there was Edward de Bono. He was a medic, a philosopher, and he was the man who really coined this logical and lateral thinking. And he said, logic's a tool to dig holes deeper and bigger and make them better holes. But if the hole is in the wrong place, then no amount of digging or same hole would put it in the right place. The disinclination to abandon the initial hole is partly a reluctance to abandon the effort that's gone into the creating of a much-loved hole, even though it may be in the wrong place. And logical thinking is digging the same hole deeper to make it a better hole. Lateral thinking is digging a new hole elsewhere. So what he's saying is, no matter how good that hole is, and our systems and procedures have grown up with a very particular industry, but now we're in a very different industry. We're in an industry that's changing. So what have we learned from that? Well, we've learned basically we've got to be innovative. We've got to be adaptable. We've got to be absolutely clear about the direction of travel. And we've got to have a vision and be prepared to abandon those conventional approaches that we've loved for so long, because we've got to think laterally. So I've structured the presentation into 3 parts, and I apologize as such a brief time that I can only cover certain areas. But first of all, looking at the signals of change and the realities in South Africa, and thinking about a smart construction industry, which everyone's beginning to use now. Then I'm going to look at 3 topics, the what. And basically, we're looking at a changing industry structure. It isn't just you that's changing, the world's changing. And we're looking at procurement, that's changing. And we've got to transform, and there's technologies out there that we're using to make that transformation. And then lastly, looking at the how. How the hell are we going to do this? What's going on? Well, one of the things I think is data, how we exploit data. The second thing we're going to really have to embrace is this circular economy. We've talked sustainability and being green, but we're going to have to walk the talk and harmonize, rationalize, digitize. So I'm going to go fast, forgive me, but basically we're on this changing world. So let's start with the why, the signals and the realities, and thinking about a smart industry. Now, smart's a term that's being used extensively around the world now. So you've got a huge number of global, geopolitical, technological, social, environmental, government pressures impacting you. It's not just you, it's everybody, whether it be China, whether it be the USA, Europe, wherever. Everybody's having to change and do things differently. So where are the signals of change? What are we looking at? Well, we're looking at urbanization. It's creating bigger cities, pressure on infrastructure. We've got climate change, sustainability, and the Sustainable Development Goals are having a huge impact. Resilience is on the radar now. You've got to be resilient. It's a term we understand, or do we? Because infrastructure now is fulfilling many different roles. And we've got digital transformation, with the digital coming into all industries. And we've got security, cyber attack, personal safety. We've got a huge amount of governance and regulatory things coming down upon us massively. And we've got new technologies and materials. And localization, regionalization, protectionism beginning to come onto the radar, as we're seeing now with the USA. And consultants and contractors. The old world of being a good old contractor is gone. We're now very different organizations. And so therefore we've developed new procurement models that give us, hopefully, better projects. And this regulatory thing is huge. And what's behind it then comes liability. Because yes, we've got regulatory systems, contracts, and so on. But we've also got liability that comes in with that. And we've got a different world that's emerged. And bureaucracy. Yes, we all hate red tape. Unfortunately, we need governance. It's very important. It gives us that way of going forward. So that's not going to change. It's going to get increasing and it's going to get more. And digital isn't just about us, the construction sector, it's changing all industry sectors. So what are the realities? And I've been very presumptuous putting on those realities. You need jobs, you need a resilient industry. You've got to change procurement. You have no choice now. And we mustn't leave the SMEs in a difficult position. They struggle sometimes. They're at the end of the food chain. And we've got to think differently about cost and value and use that technology to improve quality, productivity, and exploit the benefits of digitalization. But I want to use this term smart. Smart is used throughout the world now. Lots of countries use it. It has meaning. But do you know, change is happening so fast. We've gone from incremental to continuous change, and it's getting faster. It's necessary. It keeps us growing, keeps us interested. But vulnerability is that birthplace of innovation, creativity, change. But who would have ever believed that, for example, UK's biggest contractor, Carillion, at the time, went bust for 8.5 billion. OHL, one of Spain's largest contractors, it had to sell concessions and companies to provide cash to survive and restructure. Saudi Ager in Saudi Arabia built many iconic structures. They were declared bankrupt. They didn't pay the workers for 6 months. Fletcher, New Zealand, Australia, restructured and exited certain markets. Saudi bin Laden, Saudi's biggest contractor, restructured with Saudi government taking a part share ownership. And Evergrande in China. We've all seen the headlines, of course, but who could have ever perceived a company going owing 300 billion to its investors. So these are giga sums that we're now talking about. And Arabtech, great company based in UAE. They built the Burj Khalifa with B6 and Samsung, declared bankrupt, gone. Odebrecht, Latin America's biggest contractor. They were fined for bribery and corruption, 3.5 billion US dollars. That was the fine. It's reformed, it's half its current size, and the directors were jailed as a result of it's called the car wash, the Lavajato scandal. And Lend-Lease, one of the major international investors, they've withdrawn from the international market, focused on Australia. And lastly, we've moved from mega projects to giga projects. You know, the line, Neon in Saudi, when they're talking about trillions, the Belt and Road Initiative and so on. So this changed, companies have changed, markets have changed, projects have changed, scale has changed, procurement has changed, risk and liability have increased, complexity has increased, and digital fusion is changing that design and delivery process. And the gap between the best and the rest is widening. That gap is widening all the time. The big are getting bigger, and the gap is there. And we've got to focus upon these kind of things and focus on realities. And complexities come on our radar. And if you think of a masterpiece of complexity, the Museum of the Future in Dubai, opened in 2022, and basically it was a masterpiece of off-site manufacturing and digital production. But we are now capable as an industry, and in South Africa, you've got some great companies, you know, many of them really well, very well known. And we have the capacity now to build some major things. And indeed, in Jeddah, Saudi bin Laden are now restarted the Jeddah Tower. It's over 1 kilometer high. And Saudi has announced 4 weeks ago that they're proposing a 2 kilometer high project. Now you may say, why? Why? Well, that's iconic structures. You can't change people. So digital has become the enabler. It really has. And this changing world was all about physical things, that physical world. But now we're dealing with a social world where there's social demands, social pressures, requirements. We're dealing with a natural world and we're dealing with a digital world, and they are different. And what we as an industry have got to focus upon is how we adapt. So these signals of change are there. There's the business, the environment, the digital, the technology, the societal, the regulatory. And let's just have a look at something like the Deputy Minister talked about capital and value, and there's scale and there's complexity we have to deal with now. And if you think about capital, what we've got is natural capital. We've got social capital. We've got human capital. We've got manufactured capital. We've got financial capital, and we've also now got digital capital. So the whole concept of capital is changing. It was all about the bottom line. When I was in training, bottom line was what we talked about. But now we're talking about different things. And in the same way, value is changing. So you've now got capital, you've got value, and we talk about produce capital, natural capital, social capital, human capital. We can't shut our minds any longer and say, well, the nature will look after itself. It won't. And so we now have to think, and it's about being smart. What does it mean? What does it stand for? Systemic and sustainable, measurable and manageable, achievable, affordable, automated, resilient, reliable, responsible, technologically timely and traceable. digitalization, imagination, innovation. So smart is there. It's being used throughout the world now. It has that meaning. As South Africa, I'm sure you're embracing that. So let's move on and think about those three topics. What's happening and why, and what's going on. Well, we've got a changing industry structure. We'll have a look at procurement, and let's have a look at some of this transformation. Again, going very quickly. But this industry structure is very different now. And I want you to stop talking about the industry. I want you to start talking about the sector. Because the sector has four parts: the consultants, the construction enterprises and SMEs, manufacturers, suppliers, and the service providers. And if you focus, the global output's around 12.5 trillion. That's the annual output of the construction sector, industry sector, whatever you want to use the term. South Africa's around 6 billion, China's around 4.2 trillion, America's around 2.1 trillion. So the figures are large, yes, and basically there are fundamental differences between these groups. And again, when we talk about transformation, a consultant will transform in a different way to the contractor, who will transform differently to the manufacturer. And the sector, the service providers, the industry, the insurers, the IT, the banking, we've got to focus and recognize that this has become a very complex sector. And if you look globally, I was asked to give a global perspective. Let's look at scale, how scale has changed. And this is just a list of the top construction enterprises around the world. 11 from China, of the top 50, 20 European, 5 South Korea. It's not that point. Yes, China has emerged. It's scale. It's scale. That's really what's happened. How many would have ever perceived in the old days of Murray and Roberts having 383,000 staff? You know, you've now got Enza Construction. I don't know what the numbers are, but the scale is a big issue now. 148,000 in China Communications. And one company, China State, has a greater turnover, the annual output of the UK, Estonia, and Ireland combined. That is one company. So you're going competition with that company. Realize what you're competing with. You're competing with a huge scale. And similarly with the consultants. The Chinese companies have had a wake-up call, the consultants. They're now beginning to move into that global market. But basically the consultants have also come up in scale. Who would have ever perceived a consultant with 73,300 staff, 72,000, 60,000 at Jacobs? These are huge, huge organizations that behave in a particular way. They've embraced that transition. And we've seen this by mergers, acquisitions, and in a big way. Companies come, they go, they change, and they change their name, and they basically have a way. There are particular ownership and what their objectives are, but we've got to recognize that things don't stand still in this context. So what characterizes them? Well, consolidation, diversification, that geographical spread and scale, and also ownership, whether it's public, private, or employee-owned. It actually matters quite a lot. And embracing digital. And one thing I want you to think about is this integration that's going in. Digital's the enabler between design and production. There's more profitability to discussions, but Asian consultants are changing, and the rise of the mega firm has happened. But the other thing that's happened is they've diversified. And for example, this is IESA in Spain. They refer to how they use smart as being one of their things that they do. So smart is here. And I was in Hong Kong and China last week, and I just wanted to show you a project that's just been finished there to make you think. There's a retractable roof weighing 4,800 tons, and it can close in 30 seconds, but the technology is from the railway industry. And if you look at the consultants, what they were providing, Arup, a very well-known name, they provided civil, structural, geotechnical, building services, traffic, fire, facade, acoustics, audiovisual, sports lighting, advanced digital engineering, security, and environmental. So the old world has changed. The consultants have changed. The contractors have changed. In fact, the world has changed. So what was the messages I was trying to give you there? It's about scale. It's about China playing a different role, and they are changing. It's about size, diversification. It's about how companies are making a presence. And even we're seeing pure play consultants found in the medium and size consultancy, but we're seeing the large consultancies now looking towards sometimes providing engaging EPC projects, engineer, procure, construct. So we have that different world, and the One Belt, One Road, the Belt and Road Initiative, we all know about it. It's Pan-Africa, it's Pan-Latin America, it's Pan-Central Asia. The output between, no one knows the real figures, but some people say it can be up to 8 trillion. So this is the world of investment, the world of projects. And just to show you what we can do, this is China building a COVID quick hospital unit in 4 days. Okay, why did I show you that? It was just to show they were given a task that was military engineering, advanced logistics, amazing piece of work. It had to be done, and they did it. And the industry can do it. So let's move to procurement. I'll speed up a little now and ask ourselves, well, what about procurement? How's that changing? Well, we've now got to look at complexity. No one talked about complexity previously. We've now got to look at capability and alignment for success. And we've got to think smart about how we procure. The old ways of give us a job, we'll do it, and hopefully it all goes well. That's gone. The world now is so different. So procurement's taking on this new shape. And there's lots of rules and regulations of how we should procure. ISO standards, ISO 10845, and so on. But I want you to think about procurement as a systemic view, and it's a system, and it's basically got a boundary. It's got a lot of factors within inside it, and we've got to start using systems thinking, even on the procurement process, because it's got a lot more sophisticated. And we're seeing, the traditional way and we're now seeing the 2-envelope approach has moved to the 3-envelope approach, weighted evaluation. We're seeing integrated project delivery, early contractor involvement, early contractor supply chain involvement, very different ways of actually how we procure. And if you look at IPD around the world, relational alliance contracts, there's all kinds of things that's going on. And in some countries, it's becoming quite common. And we call this collaborative agreements rather than conflict agreements. And so we're seeing a different world, management-orientated projects. We're seeing concessions. The Deputy Minister referred to PPP. There's a whole family of PPP now that we're beginning, engineer, procure, construct frameworks. So it's a different world, and it's all about how we balance risk, how we distribute it, how the responsibility goes, and so on. So let's just think other things. Well, you also talked about modular and BIM, modular integrated construction, but let's try and simplify it. And we've been doing it for years, but now we'll be entering a new phase with advanced manufacturing. It's got to be on a platform, deployable. It's got to have common repeatable elements. You know, it's got to have a structured system, quality. It's got to be open. It's got to be circular. And it's rather like, if you think of shoes, running shoes, there's a common platform with different design elements, but the fundamentals are the same. And we've got to move in that direction to advanced manufacturing. So transformative technology, where does that fit? Well, we've got loads and loads of transformative technologies now. You know, we've got big data, data analytics, we've got AI augmentation, all kinds of things, sensors, cloud, and so on. And I give you a simple example is why do we crush concrete to find out the strength of the thing? You know, we now use sensors. And if you go to Hong Kong, quite commonly, sensors are embedded and those sensors tell us what the concrete curing things are doing. So we can use technologies. There's loads of them out there. I'd love to spend some time discussing them with you, but we haven't got that time. And we've got devices. Some people experiment with robotics. Well, again, they advance very slowly, but they're happening. 3D printing, 4D printing, and you know, wearables and so on. So there's no shortage of technologies. There's no shortage of great people with great ideas, blockchain, etc., etc. Let's go out there and look at it, understand it, and say, well, let's adapt it for South Africa. And augmented reality. And, you know, let's take the thing one stage further. A company called 𝗥𝗢𝗋 is German. They're fantastic. They've grown. They're one of the biggest construction companies in the world, but they just focus on data centers, clean rooms, advanced manufacturing. And they've exploited digitalization. They've grown hugely. They've specialized. They've integrated.
So I need a report on the A-track ducts on level 1.
Yeah, that's fine. The new colleague will do that. That'll be fine.
I need to know if the piping has been installed on level 3.
Another one for the new colleague. Oh, look, there he is. There he is. Look. Hi there.
This is Spot, developed by Boston Dynamics, owned by Hyundai. And it's been around a while now. But many construction companies, the big ones, have been experimenting, as have clients. It was a toy, it's now a usable toy. The reason for showing that is just to say these things are happening. I'm not saying that's going to happen tomorrow in South Africa, but have awareness, look and see and ask why. So let's bring this to some kind of conclusion, the how. And let's look at exploiting data. Let's look at the circular economy, the smart, and let's look at this harmonized, digital, rationalized, digitize. And data has become a very valuable resource. Collaboration has become important. A common data environment has become important because digital's transformed the way we do things. And we've got innovation, we've got data, we've got convergence. And sometimes you've got to swim against the tide. You know, people are going one way, look what they're doing, they're stupid, but are they? And what we're seeing now is change. And data years ago had no value to anybody. Really, it was just data. Now it's all about insight. machine learning, immersion, virtual reality, augmented reality, communication, modeling, spatial modeling, behaviors, and security, blockchain, encryption. What we now do is we use data. Data has value. Without data, none of these systems can work. So data has become very, very important to us. And it's all about how then that data is convergence. We're seeing convergence of design and production, convergence of companies, the barrier between contractor and consultant changing, convergence of technologies with sensors and Internet of Things, convergence of disciplines, convergence of information across the life of the project, and convergence of design with advanced manufacturing. So that world is now changing so much. And we've got integration, and we've got system thinking. On any university agenda, systems is going to become so important. We have to make the young generation think differently to the way we were taught. And a project is a very complex system of systems. I've just talked about procurement. If you look at the job site, the sub trades that carry on, the sub consultants even. We have now we need to think everything in terms of a systemic way, just the way now our systems our complex systems are working. And the point is, it's not linear. It's now non-linear. It's interconnected. It's basically sometimes very difficult to manage. So the old idea of nice, straightforward things happening in a particular way doesn't work any longer. And basically, we've got to understand all those connections, harmonize, digitalize, rationalize. So the last few slides, we've got to bridge the gaps between the design and the bid process, between the design and the supply chain, between offsite and integration with advanced manufacturing, and between data and feedback. Data has a value now to us. And what we're looking at is different data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. So data basically is understanding relations. Information is understanding the patterns. Knowledge is essentially understanding principles. It's different. It's now different. So collection of data is an information. Collection of information is not knowledge. And a collection of knowledge is not wisdom, and wisdom isn't always the truth. So let's think about this linear economy to the circular economy. I know I'm not going to bore you with all the detail because I'm sure you all know about this, but what we're all trying to move towards is eliminating waste, circulating products. The old way of take, make, dispose is gone. We now recycle, regenerate, rethink. And in circular economy is an industrial system that is regenerative and restorative. And a last is that Hong Kong Palace Museum is a fabulous project, finished last year, designed by Rocco Yip. And what they did, they used a smart construction site management platform called 𝗔𝗍smart. It was done by China Straight Construction, the big company I talked to you about. And they used all kinds of technology so they could manage the job in real time. To manage that with traditional drawings would have taken 2-3 times as long. And they use various modeling systems. And yes, it's a very complex building, as is this, which Mace is using in Australia.
So the Melbourne Metro project is a highly complex major infrastructure project. You don't get any more complex than building a tunnel underneath the centre of Melbourne.
The Metro Tunnel project is going to deliver essentially an end-to-end rail system for Melbourne's rail network. It's going to include underground stations and high-capacity trains. Essentially, we'll move about 500,000 extra people per week across the network.
The Digital Command Centre, or DCC, is an interactive digital data reporting system. It takes over 100 different data sources and combines and consolidates them in a single-touch interactive command room. The Command Centre takes state-of-the-art software and hardware and provides insightful business intelligence capability.
It's not just a product, but it's a process that incorporates culture, systems, reporting, and people. It automates the updates, the processes and the reports, and provides the client with escalations based on their requirements. The scalability of the Digital Command Centre allows for seamless integration with future technologies such as GIS spatial, BIM, 4D and 5D, live site camera feeds, and machine learning.
We know the information's consistent, it's real, it's accurate.
So what is it? What are the messages then? A new approach today is emerging. It's seamless integration of data, new skills to manage. We need data scientists. We need different skills now, not just the old silo professions. And that digital command center, around the world, you'll see a number of companies experimenting and looking at this. Machine learning is beginning to be important, as is 4D and 5D planning. So we're going to be looking at things like wearable sensors, cameras, a very different way of working with a common data environment. South Africa has moved that way. You're a very, very good construction sector. And let's hope then that change. I want you, please, be innovative, be imaginative, think collaboration, think integration, convergence, data management, think systems, and be innovative with the people, product, process, technology, and cherry pick best practice from around the world, make it appropriate. And most importantly, think smart. Every project has to be smart now. Whether it be design, procurement, companies, projects, and sites. Think differently in that way. Where are you on the scope of enlightenment? Well, there's a trigger of enlightenment, a peak of inflated expectation, a trough of disillusionment, a slope of new enlightenment. You're on that journey. You really are. And I was so encouraged by listening to the CIDB CEO and Deputy Finance Minister. You really are on a journey, but we must never forget people. They need jobs, they need skills, and they need basically hope for the future. And no matter what, always expect the unexpected. Here's a guy, late car, ready to go, getting a crash. And sometimes it goes wrong. So thank you very much for listening to me. I'm sorry I've abused a little bit. I've taken a little bit more time, but I think we're back on program now. But thank you again for listening. But it's really been a great privilege, and I wish you great success and great luck. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Flanagan, for such an insightful, informative, and thought-provoking presentation, and outlining the need for us to change and implement some of the key things while at it, and also talking about different worlds that we are now performing in, which includes the social world, which has been, in most cases, often neglected in the past. And I also enjoyed the videos where you outlined the SMART, the abbreviation SMART, in terms of our approach now when we're dealing with our construction projects delivery. And it's quite impressive that China was able to build a hospital in 4 days. That's quite very interesting. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And also, what also interested me was the Australia Metro Tunnel project, more so because I'm currently in Australia, Sydney. Yeah, so that was quite interesting. So, and when you also talked about procurement, how we need to move to approaches for systematic procurement, collaborative approaches and agreements, and also looking at different options for concessions, EPC, and framework agreements, and more so, and also painting a picture that our manufacturing processes have advanced. Now we are doing advanced manufacturing through modular and all of those things. Transformative technology was also quite interesting, where you outlined different devices in automation, 3D printing, robotics, drones, and all of that, which was followed by that video from 𝗥𝗢𝗕 Yeah, so that's basically that. And thank you for also painting a picture of where we are currently in South Africa, and also urging us to move to more innovative and imaginative approach. We need to see change as something that is possible, but it will happen slowly as we are adapting, as the construction industry adapts, to think collaboration, integration, convergence, data management, and systems. And systems, I liked how you urged or you highlighted that the younger generation needs to be taught about systems. We need to start thinking about systems in terms of our curriculums and all of that. So thinking smart and cherry pick practices from all around the world. And thank you so much for that, Prof. It is very, very insightful. And the quality and the structure of the presentation was top tier. Thank you so much. And moving right along with our program, and we are on time. So now we're moving to our questions and answer discussion, where there's different questions, of which some of them have been answered already. Some only going to be asking or asking the questions that have not been answered. So from Zibusiso Nzimande, he said that Prof. Flanagan, in the lead up to 2010 World Cup, South Africa turned to a public-private partnership model to deliver the Gautrain, one of our most complex infrastructure projects. This involved international firms like Bombardier, Canada, and all of the other ones. Due to limited internal capacity at that time, drawing on international experience, how can South Africa follow a model similar to places like Dubai, which successfully leverages global expertise while aggressively building domestic capability, to ensure that our future mega projects are increasingly led by local professionals and firms rather than outsourced by necessity? Yeah.
Do you want me to answer that one? Okay.
Yes, please.
I used to come to South Africa quite a lot. I've always loved South Africa very much. The position with PPP is, I would say, have a look around the world. Please do. If you look, for example, the World Bank were relatively maybe slow, a little bit slow, but now the regulatory systems are in place. I think when you did the Gautrain, it was a different world then. There have been a lot more successes. There are some failures, but China is embracing PPP. Hong Kong has it. USA has it. All of Europe is embracing it. There are many different models. There's not one model fits all. You've got to really, and I would localize, I would look carefully at what the multinational banks are doing when it comes to PPP, but there are lessons there. So what I would say is, yes, I remember the project, Marianne Roberts and all the team there. But basically things have changed. The world has changed. PPP is now matured. And I think it went through that maturity stage, and you were in the infancy stage much more. But and localize it all the time. Localize, think local, think local. You know, you can. That's what will really make the difference. So I'm asking you to go out there and have a look at some of the governance structures that would work much better.
Okay. No, thank you so much, Prof. I think the next question, you've actually covered it with your answer that you just said now. And yeah, there's a question. Sarah is asking, is it possible to receive the presentation from the keynote speaker? But that one I can answer. The CIDB will actually share the webinar link recording for the full webinar to everyone who's in attendance. Okay, moving on to the other question is from Darling Nebo, which says that will the industry be moving toward value-based procurement models that favor long-term impact over the lowest bid?
Yes, absolutely. You know, can I give you one example? For example, I don't know how familiar South Africa is with the 2-envelope or the 3-envelope approach, but in Hong Kong, what one uses is we're always looking for value for money. And the same in the UK. What the 2-envelope approach does is there are 2 envelopes, a technical and a financial, and you open the technical first, and it uses a weighted evaluation for the tender. And then after you've got the weighted evaluation for the technical side, you then open the financial, and that again, and there is a weighting that is used. I would say again, have a look around the world, because Singapore, Hong Kong, many countries have now developed some fairly good systems. And when you choose a tender, we must never forget that the people who've bid have spent time, money, effort, and they deserve feedback, proper feedback about the tender. The old world was you opened the tender, sometimes publicly, and the winner was the low bid. That doesn't work anymore. We've gone away from that. That's not value for money anymore. And so I'd say, have a look at those systems. They're out there and they do actually work very well.
Okay. Thank you so much, Prof. From Batandwa is saying technological advancements in the use of alternative technologies in construction SA is generally constrained by regulations. What would the advice be? Should we dare to push through and trust the regulation will catch up, or be conservative to preserve our resources?
All right, let me simplify that. It's a good question. When you get on an aeroplane, do you ever, any of you, think, I wonder who made these components? I wonder what standards they used? And you never ever think, you just sit down in the seat and you go. And in the same way, we've got international standards. We do have standards, ISO standards and varieties of standards around the world. So I don't think actually the problem is the standard. The problem is compliance with the standard. That's really the question. But it's a very good point that's been made. But I think the standards are already out there. Don't go and reinvent the wheel. They're there. Engage in the creative swiping of good ideas.
Okay, well said, Prof. This one is just a comment from Linda. Linda is saying, add to BMI concept, blockchain in civil engineering construction. We have exciting times for the world ahead. So the last question, Prof, is coming from Professor Raymond, who's saying the key challenge to uptake of latest technology in construction is the pressure to create and retain jobs. How do you work toward optimization of employment of wide range of skills capabilities, yet adopt latest technologies for a developing country like us in South Africa?
Okay, another really good question. Contrast South Africa with India, with Pakistan, with many of the, I don't like the term developing, but anyway, but many of the developing world countries, it's all about jobs for people. And it doesn't mean technology makes people redundant. It doesn't. It can improve, it can help, it can skill. And I wouldn't be too scared. I think we're sometimes scared that the technology takes our jobs away. It doesn't always, and sometimes it can create jobs. And I think the world is moving that way, but there's no quick fix, but don't hold back. But yes, take the people with you, skill the people. Once they understand why and what and how, I think people are very adaptable. And I think technology is an enabler. I don't think it's a barrier.
Thank you so much, Prof. That brings us to the end of our Q&A session. We were supposed to have a break, but in the interest of time, I'll suggest that we continue with the program. So now we have the second segment, which is the second session, where we'll be having a panel discussion of different industry experts and stakeholders on procurement practices, contracting, project management, and efficient project delivery within the construction industry, with the aim of discussing different aspects that can improve or contribute towards the growth of South Africa's construction industry. So thank you so much for having me as your program director for this first segment of our webinar. It's been a pleasure, and thank you to everybody who's participated in the Q&A session, the comments, the suggestion. We appreciate it. So now I'll be handing over to the moderator of the second segment, Ms. Zamageda Zungu, who will be moderating the panel discussions. Over to you, Ma'am Zungu. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sulu. What a stellar job you've done. I just want to take time to thank you for the stellar job you've done to get us this far. Good morning, colleagues and industry partners. My name is Zamageda Zungu, and I will be your moderator for this panel discussion. As you know from all the keynote addresses, as well as the morning addresses, that the sub-themes that we'll be looking at today are procurement, contracting, as well as program and project management. Now, I'm not going to go through everything that was discussed by my predecessors in terms of the speakers, but what we do, or what we have established by now, is that the country is at a crossroads. We are at a pivoting point. There is a reason to have hope because we've seen increased civil contractor confidence. We've seen some increase in investments into water and sanitation infrastructure, but we're also seeing the revisiting of 𝗘𝗍𝗯 projects in the energy sector, the water sector, as well as the digital infrastructure. The question is, however, how do we sustain this momentum? How do we make it inclusive and transformation and make it durable progress? To help me answer this question today, I am joined by 4 industry leaders who I will request to kindly switch on their videos while I introduce them briefly. The first panelist we are joined by Mr. 𝗘𝗅𝗰𝗲𝗪𝗓, who is a seasoned quantity surveyor with over 11 years experience in delivering large-scale infrastructure mining projects. 𝗘𝗅𝗰𝗲𝗪 currently serves as a commercial manager at Lubicon Group and is also a director of 𝗙𝗓 & Associates. The second panelist we've got is Mr. Lufuno Radziku. Lufuno is the president of the South African Council for the Project and Construction Management Professions. Lufuno brings strategic leadership, a background in construction management, and a strong drive for professionalization and transformation across the built environment. He is particularly passionate about values of transparency, due diligence, as well as social cohesion. And these are themes we've heard come up in the addresses we've had this morning. The third panelist I've got is Dr. Neil Govender, who is a professionally registered civil engineer and project manager in both South Africa and the UK. He's currently managing water infrastructure delivery for a major global technology company, and is also a postdoctoral research fellow here at WITS, where he focuses on procurement reform and complex project delivery. And lastly, but certainly not least, allow me the pleasure of introducing Mr. Nkosinathi Guseni, who is the CID Director of Regions and is responsible for all the provincial offices. Prior to assuming his role, Nkosinathi was the CIDB Provincial Manager for the Northwest as well as Gauteng provinces for 13 years. He has worked for numerous public sector entities and government departments within the area of SMME development. Now, now that we've welcomed all my panelists, I see I am missing two panelists here. Dr. Neil Govender, is your video on? I see you're just not coming up on my screen. Let me just scroll a bit. Okay.
It's on, Sama.
Oh, thank you, Neil. Thank you. All right, so to kick off the panel discussion, I think let's start where most construction projects begin. We're going to tackle the first sub-theme, which is procurement. Now, with the majority of our infrastructure projects underperforming, many of the failures that have been reported can be traced back to flawed procurement systems. Now, Dr. Govender, based on your research as well as cross-sector delivery experience, what procurement reforms would you say are urgently required to restore transparency, improve outcomes, and support long-term project success?
Thanks for that question, Zama. I think in terms of the challenges we have regarding procurement, one of the issues is transparency that you've mentioned. Prof. Flanagan mentioned that in the past, everybody would submit a tender, you'd get an outcome, you know who won, but you wouldn't get individualized feedback. And I think that's something that's very relevant in South Africa. Certainly during my time as a consultant, we would put hundreds of hours in on an annual basis, submitting tenders. And I'd say in a good year, we'd have a hit rate of around 7 to 10%. So I think from a transparency perspective, number one, it would be to give tenderers insight and visibility into the entire process. So from the time you submit a tender, where is it in the actual evaluation process? Fair enough, due to the volume of tenderers submitting, it may not always be possible to give individualized feedback, but I think certainly we should try and give feedback regarding the winning bidder. As a minimum, what points do they get? What price did they submit? And I don't think it's done, but I think it should be done. How did they win? So we've got functionality criteria which says, okay, for any given bid, you need to score X amount of points, you need to submit these resources, you need to have this sort of experience. That should be made public so that all the tenderers that have submitted, they don't feel aggrieved at the end of the day. When a result comes out, they may have spent countless hours working on that tender, only to realize another bidder has won, but in their minds, they feel that they could have delivered a better product, a better project. The other thing that has come across to me during my time in industry and from my research is the delays in the tendering process. So often you'd have situations where you submit either as a consultant or contractor, you've committed resources or you've assigned resources to the projects. But what you find is those tenders, in terms of validity period, just gets rolled over. And by the time it actually comes to market and the client is ready to go into construction or to start the design, the resources that you've allocated there have actually moved on to other projects. So I think to mitigate those sort of issues, number one, upfront planning by the client side to ensure that we don't have the delays. Number two, to ensure that they have adequate resources, competent resources within the client body to evaluate those tenders. Prof. Flanagan also mentioned, or was it the CIDB CEO, having a competent client. And I think that's something in this entire procurement circle that sometimes is missed from a South African perspective, because on the other side, we have private sector who are your consultants and your contractors. They have all the skills, the expertise, and the resources to submit tenders. But they are under the assumption that the clients that are putting out this work, the people that are undertaking the evaluation, have those sort of skills to evaluate the tenders. They have the technical know-how on complex projects. And from my experience, that's not always the case. So I think capacitating the clients and ensuring that we've got knowledgeable clients with the relevant qualifications, expertise, and experience in construction and infrastructure procurement as a whole.
Thank you, Dr. Govender. You've given us some items to think about, and especially on the competence of the client part, which I will circle back to later, but 100% agree with the transparency as well as the planning ahead of time for construction projects. I mean, if you look at the statistics of how many tenders are cancelled before they are actually kicked off, that's also something I think we need to look at as a country, where we do have a backlog of infrastructure, and we do need this infrastructure yesterday, not today. So we have to do a bit better in terms of planning ahead of time, but also following through. And just to move on from that, let's get some views from the contractor side. So I'm going to move on to Mr. 𝗘𝘅𝗰𝗲𝗋𝗂. Mr. 𝗘𝘅𝗰𝗲𝗋𝗂, how do you think current procurement practices, particularly the lowest price tendering, which I think we've mentioned a lot today, affects your ability as a contractor to manage risk as well as deliver quantity? Would you say we are incentivizing poor workmanship and short-term thinking through current contract models, or is it possible for a contractor to do quality work within the confines of the current procurement practices that we've got in South Africa?
Thank you, Zama. And good morning, colleagues. I think as a contractor from our side, I think it's twofold. I think we have reached a point where, as contractors, are starting to price ourselves out of the market to a point where, the client will have a set budget. However, because the notion has been the lowest bid always wins, we are now essentially creating more risk instead of actually protecting private spend to ensure quality, projects. And I think for me, it is also twofold. I think the doctor touched on it to say the procurement process and the transparency part of it doesn't always reflect, what actually happened. And I think it is one of the risk areas that we find ourselves as an industry. And perhaps it again speaks to the people that implement. I think we touched on it to say, as professionals and the private sector, I think we really put an effort in preparing tenders. And again, I don't think our SOEs are lacking in systems. I think the lack is in the implementation. And perhaps if we can start getting that right, I think Prof. Flanagan touched on it to say, we are on an uptrend in terms of our construction industry, but if we're not going to have the right people in place to implement, I think we are going to be stagnant for, another couple of years. I think as an industry that again absorbs, over 1.3 million people in the Q2 of 2024, it is an industry that really plays a critical role in addressing, the social impacts, such as, our youth unemployment at 44%. And again, we can't start absorbing those skills if the industry is stagnant. I think the doctor touched on it again to say, if you are going to change one thing within procurement, it's certainly the response time from SOEs. 90 days is a bit long if you're trying to curb our current social pandemics. And I think for me, it is, our point of discussion to say, how do we assist, government in addressing that 90-day period and really address the backlog of contracts that we currently have?
Thank you so much, Mr. 𝗘𝘅𝗰𝗲𝗲, for that response. Certainly speaking on, some of the vulnerabilities I think contractors face in this country. And for one, it's very difficult as an emerging contractor, to keep your company afloat with the current standards. And with that, I would like to move to Mr. Kuseni. So, Mr. Kuseni, as I read from your bio, you've worked or still work very closely with small and emerging contractors. And if we look at the stats for 2023, contractors in grade 1 to 3 secured less than 20% of the total project value in terms of what was issued by our government. Now, and I think the number was closer to 18%. What practical steps do you think we can take to ensure that procurement processes better support inclusive growth and promote emerging contractor development? Because that is an area where we as a country are really, really lacking in.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to everyone. One of the challenges that we face as the country is that one of balancing delivery and development. Procurement is a tool that we use to deliver services or deliver infrastructure for our society. But on the same breath, the same procurement is that tool that we must use to develop the emerging sector, in particular those who are coming from historically disadvantaged backgrounds. And in doing so, at times, you may find that government may have challenges on which one to prioritize. But they cannot ignore that it is the responsibility of government to ensure that the industry, especially the emerging sector, is developed. So in trying to improve the procurement processes that may assist the emerging sector, we must look at how do we address systemic barriers like access to opportunities by the emerging sector, the financial constraints, in other words, access to credit for the emerging sector, the issue of capacity gaps, because if you look at our emerging sector, which is your grade 1s to grade 6, in other words, from 0 to let's say about 10 million rands worth of projects. Most of those contractors in those categories, they do not have formal qualifications that speak to construction industry. They have skills that they may have learned as they go along doing work either as subcontractors or as as semi-skilled laborers within the industry. So we need to find a way as to how do we close the gap. But if we look at to how do we then ensure that they do have access to opportunities, as you raise the issue of your grades 1 to 2, getting less than 20% of government procurement, we need to restructure our procurement strategies when we are wanting to engage those emerging sectors. CIDB has provided tools on how to unbundle projects, with SANRAL being a good example of the state-owned entities that has used that strategy of ensuring that projects are unbundled so that smaller smaller contractors are able to access work which ordinarily they would not have accessed. But by virtue of unbundling them, then you'll find your grade 1s to grade 4 being able to work on projects which would have been large or which would have been complex. But by virtue of unbundling them, they are able to access them. The issue of accessing finance, yes, there are government funding institutions like your IDC, I think in the Eastern Cape, they have ECDC, and many others, your CFAs, that are there to assist the emerging contractors to be able to respond well and be able to deliver on those projects. But again, when procurement is being designed or when it takes place, it must take then into consideration that those that would be targeted at those levels, they would be able, they must be given some time to be able to raise those funds, because it's not easy to access funds which would be assisting them to fund those projects. On the issue of capacity building of those contractors, CIDP has been on the forefront in saying that we must have programs that are aimed at developing the emerging contractors, not to through them being given projects, but being given but also being given skills which will assist them to be able to work beyond the project term or beyond the term that they are incubated. And lastly, if in the planning of projects, government entities are able then to set aside projects which are designed for development of the emerging sector, it then becomes easy for them to access those opportunities, because they will not be competing with big companies, but they will be in a protected environment where they could work on their own and be able to grow in a protected environment and be able to get those skills. CIDP, with the introduction of BUILD, is now in a process of ensuring that the emerging sector, especially grade 2 to grade 5, their skills are assessed, whereupon being assessed, they will then be given training which will try and close those gaps, such that those who need those skills, they are given those skills which are required by the industry. And also, lastly, something which may sound very controversial, as you are raising the issue of the 20% access, actually, if we are to look deeply, the situation is very bad when it comes to the emerging sector. CIDP has tried to protect the small businesses. From 2016, we have not been downgrading contractors in order to try and give them that opportunity. But if CIDP were to remove that protection and allow and contractors are downgraded, you will be shocked in terms of what we would see, because a lot of companies that are historically owned, that are owned by historically disadvantaged groups, will actually be downgraded, and they will not have opportunities to access those works. So it's important that then we improve on those procurement systems so that the emerging sector is able to access work and also be able to sustain themselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kuseni, and thank you for acknowledging, or agreeing that there is an issue with the emerging sector. I just would like to follow up on something you mentioned. I know you did actually, I had a question as you were speaking, but you started to answer my question, which was around, we see a lot of incubation programs and a lot of contractors going into these programs. And at the end of those programs, contractors would leave without the necessary skills, that are required to grow in the industry. We do know we have an issue of there's no barrier to entry. So at the lower grades, especially, we do have a lot of people without construction experience, if you can say. So you started mentioning that you're looking at providing these skills or capacitating these contractors beyond, that incubation period. Do you mind maybe just unpacking in terms of what would be the plan? Because I know with most of the current incubation programs, it's that they would be provided access to finance and they would get opportunities to actually do work. And I did a research study that looked at contractors post these incubation periods, and most of them were saying, okay, whilst we had jobs then, we now sometimes can get jobs, however, we do not have finance to access, or because when we had those jobs, the main contractor or whoever was overseeing was the one managing the project. So there's also a lack of skills transfer in those programs. So what is the plan, really around improving those programs to ensure that we are actually developing contractors who will grow into, bigger companies at the end of the day?
One of the problems with the incubation programs, it's the entry to the program. When entities that are incubating these contractors admit them to that entry, it's how they select those contractors. Because what is important is that you select a person who has a potential to develop. In other words, you assess the business acumen of the owner of this company. In 𝗥𝗄𝗰𝗲𝗃, we had about 20 SMMEs, wherein they entered at grade 1. But when they exited, some of them were sitting at grade 7, grade 6, grade 8, which is huge for a person within the emerging sector and being in the program for a period of 2 years. And I know that some of them already are aware. There's one that is working with at the Richards Bay terminal as one of the subcontractors there, which is quite a huge project. Now, the problem that we are having is how we allow them to enter into the program. And also when they are inside, instead of focusing on the project or the work that they are getting, we need to focus more on the skills that they are being given. The skills must be such that they are able to sustain them beyond the program. So CIDB's NCDP, for instance, it says year 1 and year 2, you are protected. Year 3, you compete amongst your peers within the incubators so that you begin to understand the world that you are being prepared for. Then after that, you are able to go out. So if you have failed with competing with your peers in a protected environment, surely outside you will fail. So with the build program, as we are assessing the skills, we are now looking at those that are already, they are not necessarily in the incubation program, but they are registered with CIDB. So we'll be assessing their skills, seeing what is it that they lack for them to have sustainable businesses. And then from the outcomes or the results that will be coming out, we will then be giving them the skills to ensure that we are able to have contractors in our registers that everyone can believe, or that everyone can have faith in, that they'll be able to deliver when they are given work to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kuseni. And in the CIDB, I think you said NCDP program that you've got, it sounds like that's a more realistic approach. And I like putting them in a competitive environment because the construction industry is inherently competitive. So I really, really like that approach and would like to see it actually playing out throughout in all the incubation programs that we do have in the country. And just to take a last question on the first subtopic, I'm going to put Mr. Kuseni off the hot seat for now and transition back to Dr. Govender. So Dr. Govender, we've seen a promising uptake in e-tendering systems, but only a portion of these, or limited portion rather, we are seeing in the South African government, especially in the procurement of infrastructure. A question has come up about, this e-tendering thing. Are we simply digitizing broken processes, or are these platforms actually helpful in helping us reimagine how we procure? The question I have for you, though, is with all this background I've just given now, what role should digital procurement platforms and e-tendering systems play in the future of the South African construction industry?
I think as a starting point, e-tendering system is certainly the way that the world is going, at least the first world. And again, going back to Prof. Flanagan's address, the industry that we're working in now is changing. It's rapidly changing. It's not the same industry that we were in 10, 20 years ago. And so we're seeing in Europe the rapid uptake of e-tendering. I would say it provides a process where it's real time, it's auditable. You can see exactly where you are in the process, who's the winner. But bringing it back to the South African context, I think we've got our own challenges in terms of procurement, and you are just discussing now around emerging contractors and trying to upskill those emerging contractors. The same would go for emerging consultants. I think although e-tendering does have a future in our industry, I think it's something that we should pilot first of all among a few clients, maybe on the larger scale projects with the consultants and the contractors that have the capacity to utilize those systems. The systems need to be user-friendly. We need to have considerations like protection of personal information, because with any tender that you submit, you've got your commercial documents that are sensitive. But in doing that, we can't exclude the emerging contractors, the emerging consultants that don't have access, or they may have access, but they'd find it very difficult to utilize these systems. So I would say start off with a pilot on a small scale and then slowly transition and roll it out throughout the industry. You mentioned that, are we digitizing broken processes? For me, the process that we have in place currently, I wouldn't exactly put it as broken. My view still remains that on the client side, we've got challenges. And if you've got an informed client that knows what your scope of the project is, what you're trying to achieve, not just on a project level, but on a program and a long-term level, you will have a fairly good understanding of how to define your functionality criteria to ensure that the most appropriate consultants or contractors are selected on jobs. And then when you move to the next part of your evaluation, which is the price, price is always a hotly contested topic amongst consultants and contractors. You should already have those contractors or consultants that you view as appropriate for the job. And then it's up to market forces. Things like value for money. Value for money can be brought in at your functionality stage, where you insert defined criteria to tell your consultant or contractor, you need to show us how you're going to do X, Y, and Z in terms of value for money. And then as a client, when you are evaluating that tender, you can say, okay, this bidder meets the criteria, this bidder doesn't. But coming back to your question on e-tendering, I think it's something that we need to look at as a country in terms of the way forward, so that we're not left behind, but we can't exclude certain members of our industry.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Govender, for that response. That brings us to a close of our first sub-theme, and we're going to shift gears now slightly and move on to the second sub-theme, which is contracting. So we're moving from how work is awarded to how work is being governed. And you would have heard from the CIDB CEO's address, the Deputy Minister's address, as well as I think Prof. Flanagan also mentioned this. We do have a challenge in South Africa of delayed payment. I saw there were questions around that as well in the chat box from the discussion. Now, I'm going to ask Mr. 𝗘𝘅𝗰𝗲𝗋𝗄𝗧, who's got experience as a contractor and would have at some point in time probably had this impact their company or their project. Now, from your point of view, Lukhanyo, what practical measures do you believe we can take to address the endemic issue of delayed payments?
Yeah, so thanks for that, Zama. I think payments continue to be, again, the make or break of any business. It is not just, I guess, revenue, but more importantly, cash flow. And you find a lot of projects fail, not because we don't have the right technical skills, but because of cash flow. And, the delayed payments really then underpin that. So I think for us, contractually, most contracts have recourse actions in terms of interest on late payments, but that is after the effect, you know. A non-payment for 3 months, you know, by the time you start to restart your project, half your team is not there. There's an additional cost that you levy to the client just to reestablish. And it really creates a problem that shouldn't be in the system. Again, you know, it is, call it financial year end for SOEs. And we are now sitting with an issue in the country that says, well, whenever there is financial year end, generally there is a slow pace in terms of purchase orders being issued out. And this, again, then delays your payment, because without a purchase order, you can't get paid. So I think contractually you do have recourse, but I think for us, it is, I guess, you know, our employers finding processes that are counterintuitive. I think what happens is, you know, forward planning, I think, is quite key. I mean, we all know what the financial year end is, and I think we could do better in ensuring that the right measures are in place. And I think just to not really go back on procurement, I think it is an item that really also impacts. And I think Mr. Kuseni touched on, or Mr. Kusele touched on it, to say, I think the country struggles with the balance between development and also implementation with the right, I guess, consultant. And again, what we're finding is you've got one consultant that's done design, and you've got another consultant that is supposed to implement, who is not going to carry the PI for the work that is being implemented. And this just creates another 6 months of delay. And again, you know, you get, you know, sayings like, you know, contractors are claims prone. And again, the issue is systematic. And, you know, once you can start deal with that process and implementation, then things like payments really are, or rather would be, the least of our problems as contractors. So I think it really just talks to having implementation correct. But again, I think contractually, I think we all know we've got recourse. But again, that recourse there doesn't really assist in terms of project delivery on time, and more importantly, quality. You know, to have to come back months later to rework areas that you had already done is, again, a cost impact and a quality issue. So yeah, I think that for me really is an area that can be dealt with. And yeah, I think efforts really need to be put in.
Thank you so much, Lukhanyo. I just have a follow-up question on that. You have started to answer it a bit in the end. You spoke about having recourse in the contract, you know, for delayed payment or non-payment, if that's the case. However, do you believe that this recourse is sufficient for all the losses the contractor would be, you know, faced with? And this sometimes is not just financially. You've got reputational loss. You could have your creditors cutting off your credits in terms of your suppliers. So can you maybe list just how bad it can get, you know, the consequences of delayed or non-payment from clients?
So I think for us, it really, and I think you touched on it, Zama, I think, you know, to have a 10 million rand certificate that's not paid, you would essentially have 60-70% cost sitting with suppliers that were waiting for that payment. You know, as a business, you know, we've sat under those situations where, you know, we had judgments against our name. It's taken us almost 5 years just to clear those judgments. And what that does is it really makes it hard to open up credit facilities. And unfortunately, you know, construction cannot be run like a spaza shop where you are pulling out cash from the bank if it's not there. And again, you know, some clients really go the extra mile to really create even bigger problems for the contractor in terms of then going for your guarantees. So you will sit with a non-payment, but they will find measures in the contract to say, well, how do we then get money out of the contractor, even though the problems are not created? So it then really compounds, I guess, issues for the contractor, because again, you sit with non-payment, you sit with workers that are not paid in an environment that you are also new to, because we do projects where they are needed. And it really creates, outside of just the financial impact, it really then creates a risk for your people in neighborhoods that I guess you are not known to. And, you know, we've had projects that get stopped, we've had our people get threatened, and you sit and you say, well, Mr. Client, can you come help me address this problem? And it is a referral, and, you know, you make promises that are not kept, and it really just compounds. So you are quite right. It is, you know, the recourse in the contract doesn't really deal with the realities that we face outside of the, I guess, contract. And yeah, so I think it really just compounds, Zama.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. 𝗘𝘅𝗰𝗲𝗓, for that response. Now, just sticking with the risk element in terms of contracts, the South African construction landscape is really known for contractual risks. And sometimes these are not just legal risks. We've got an issue of margin, which we've heard Mr. Lukhanyo just go through. You've got relationships that are at stake, and even project viability in most instances. Now, Mr. Guseni, given your experience in working with contractors, what would you say are some of the most common contractual risks in our construction industry, and how can these be proactively managed on the ground?
Thanks, Zama. One of the challenges that we have, especially with our contractors, I think Prof touched on something very important, but it was relating to the triple Ps, which I think in my case, it refers to the contracts. We need to find ways to localize our contracts because in most cases, the contractors who are at the receiving end may at times lack the understanding of what they are signing on, as their focus in most cases is on just getting that project which they've been chasing for a number of years. And when that time comes, they would just go in sign with limited understanding. For instance, if you look at issues where there's ambiguity in contracts that they would be signing, with scopes not properly defined, and also the understanding that in South Africa, we operate in a very politicized environment. And as the clients or the officials would be issuing out those contracts to the contractor, having understood, maybe the contractor understanding what is it that they are supposed to do in the middle of the implementation of the project, then there will be changes of what must be delivered by the contractor. And during that process, there would be changes now in the budget. You'd find that the contract is delayed, or the implementation of the project is delayed because there are no funds, whilst the client would be wanting that the work must be done, though they do not understand that it must be done in that period. The issue of delays and also the extension of projects, also it's always there, and in some cases this is caused by poor planning of the officials and very little to do with the contractors. Also, what Mr. 𝗘𝘅𝗰𝗲𝗓 just raised, the issue of the construction mafia. When the contracts that we are using, like your JBCC, your FIDIC, your NEC, and so on, were written, I don't think that in mind they had thinking that we may have issues of construction mafia coming in, and with now having to deal with those issues of construction mafia, they are also affecting the project deliveries. And the issue of how risks are allocated, you will find that the focus is mostly is on the cause that might be perceived as coming from the contractor, and you'll find that it is the contractor that always gets penalized. And maybe lastly, the issue of contractors fearing to charge interest on overdue payments to clients, with the fear that should I charge interest, I may not, I'll be penalized and not be able to get work in future. So if we can find ways to address all of those things, ensuring that if a contractor is awarded work, the scope is very clear, and there are no changes whilst the work is ongoing if the project won't be funded. If the contracts that we have are now upgraded or updated to have the elements that we are facing in South Africa of disruptions of sites, because that is still going to be ongoing, because it is a social issue where people, it could be, others can say it's crime, but there are those who are saying that people are demanding to have opportunities and they are being used by the criminal elements. So we must find a way as to how do we incorporate these in our existing contracts so that we have projects that are delivered on time, but also protect the contractor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kuseni, for that response. Now, just because you touched on the contracts, I'm going to follow up the question where historically, most of the standard construction contracts were very adversarial in nature in terms of the master-slave relationship between the contractor and the client. Now, looking at the South African landscape and context, especially when it comes to this construction mafia thing, do you think that it's actually possible to move from these adversarial stance? I know a lot of the contracts have done some work in trying to make them more collaborative. Like I think in the earlier versions of the JBCC, they used to have a clause like the contractor must do something to the satisfaction of the PA, which for me is it's very subjective. What's the satisfaction of the PA, which left the contractor really without recourse in most situations. But they have done some work in terms of changing the language and moving towards a more collaborative partnership type of contract. However, that role of master-slave still remains, because when issues of things like the construction mafia come up, you find that the client still sees it as this is the contractor's problem, and the project is not viewed as the most what needs to be protected in that type of agreement. It's always about throwing the contract back at each other rather than looking at the best interests of the project itself. So do you think there's actually room for us, or we can have that change in mindset as a country to move towards more partnership agreements than merely just these adversarial contracts that we have?
Look, I think there is an opportunity to change. There is an opportunity to localize the current contracts that we have, that we are using in South Africa. As much as if you look in what we call the contractors in the emerging sector, that most of them are unskilled, most of them they do not have skills, and so on and so on, and therefore they may not be able to lobby. If you look at Lubokon, where Lucanio is from, they are one of the example of the contractors who could have chosen to work in the space of consultants, but they've chosen to work in the space of contractors. And there's many more who are like that, who are professionals, who are engineers, but they've decided to be contractors. And the more we have these sessions, the more time we give them to vocalize and to give them opportunities to be able to say what is it that needs to be done, we'll arrive at a level where they will be able to influence the industry, to be able to write contracts that are talk to our South African context, that are localized, that will be able to take into consideration all the challenges that we are facing as the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kuseni. And from that, you are just reaffirming, what we've been talking about all day, that change in this industry actually requires everyone's input. But now I want to move to a panelist I have not yet spoken to, who may fear that I might have, forgotten about him. Now, Mr. Ratsigu, just in the contracting theme, in your experience, having worked in construction management, would you say we are doing enough as a country to build contract administration capacity within the public sector? Or is that where many of these breakdowns in the system, in the process, in the contracts that we're talking about begins?
Thank you, Zama. I never suspected that you've forgotten me. I don't think we are there yet in terms of doing enough. And maybe let's try contextualize what it means to build capacity. When we build capacity, we must have all agreed that we are lacking it so that we put collaborative efforts. And I'm not sure, your question seems to be directed also to the state entities or the public sector. I'm not sure if collectively we have sat down, figured it out and agreed that we do have lack of capacity. And I'll give you my hypothesis why I think so. Part of the mandates of the SACP-CMP is professionalization of the state, which I think from time to time, if you listen closely to the speech of the president and the speeches of the ministers within the infrastructure fraternity, they do speak about capacity enhancement, which is for me a political acknowledgement. But when it comes down from a policy level to be implemented down, we don't seem to be finding each other. And then let me give you one practical example. The project life cycle that we speak about from all the councils of the built environment has about 6 stages. But you still go to a public sector entity and find something else that has 9 stages. And you say, how do you intend to complete a project of 24 months when you've got 9 stages of paperwork, literally, and nothing else but paperwork? Now, what is our measures of filling that gap? Now that my answer is that we have not done enough in terms of building a contract administration capacity. I like the point raised by CIDB of localization of forms of contracts, standard forms of contracts. Now, I would even go further and say, we start with what we have. We have the forms of contracts that are currently implemented, although they are originally crafted with international influence. For example, FIDIC is a baby of the World Bank. But you find it implemented in areas where the implementers don't actually understand and appreciate its clauses. Be it from payment perspective, be it from recourse when the contractor or the consultant is not treated well. How do we now sit and say all these forms of contracts that we have that are international, how do we make sure that they've got clauses that acknowledge our situations? Maybe if we address that, we might not see a need to jump into a newly formulated contract that we might not be ready for, but we take the lessons from those contracts after they are amended to suit our situations, then we develop our own. And one example is, if you look at the standard forms of contracts that we have now, how many of them are addressing with interest? And interest, I'm speaking about the best interest of the industry, the issue of guarantees. You don't find that. Why is that? Is our transformation reading saying we are there, we don't need to enhance the guarantees issues? as just an example amongst many other issues that we are raising. The other issues coming back to my interest representing the SACP-CMPs. Our life cycle does not have a public sector life cycle and a private sector life cycle of project. But it's supposed to be the same across the board, yeah? Now, when we test the competencies and the readiness of professionals that we are supposed to release into the industry to manage major contracts, you still find the difference between the life cycle of the public sector and the life cycle of the private sector, which I do not know why. And in my view, the public sector was supposed to be sitting much more closer to that project life cycle. I appreciate the deliverables that are needed per all stages and the milestones, but we still find that gap. Yet, there are so many consultants that are working in the public sector space. I don't know why there is, we call it hegemony and apathy in the matter of transferring skills. If I am a public sector leader now, I should actually put my foot down and say, any consultant who comes here is equally going to empower my people through the contract, and I make sure that it's part of the black and whites that are written there to say, you are not only going to deliver, you are going to take my 3 professionals hand to hand with what you're doing, so that when you leave here, they are as close as being you in performance. They will never steal your work because we've got mandates to promote business and to make sure that implementation is done by a collaboration of public and private sector. So we are not there yet, Zama. That is my answer in terms of building contract administration capacity. And we don't seem to have enough interest, if I can take it further than that.
Thank you so much for that. I don't know whether I should call it bold, but a very, very comprehensive response and contrary to the status quo. You know, when you mentioned that, it may seem that there is acknowledgement in, you know, speeches and public spaces around the issue of a lack of capacity. However, the reality on the ground is that there is no formal acknowledgement of that in terms of ensuring that we are trying to build this capacity. For me, was very interesting because I, in my opinion, I thought that's what everybody knows and that's what we all think. And I thought because there is a drive within the public sector side to professionalize their project managers as well as quantity surveyors, I thought that they were actually building that gap, but I had not thought about the actual structural, or process of trying to correct that from starting from scratch to defining where the actual lack is and how we're actually going to do it, where we are all moving forward with one mind and agreement. So with that for now, I'm going to close the second subtopic of contracting and move on now to the third subtheme, which is project and program management. So we've spoken about the award of the work, we've spoken about the governance of work. We now want to look at delivery. And this is very important because this is the part that the public sees and experiences, which means that this is what your end user will actually be experiencing. And if projects are meant to, satisfy the needs of the community or the people of South Africa, surely we should plan them with those end users in mind. Now, despite established frameworks that me and a lot of my colleagues spent time developing, we still struggle to deliver infrastructure that is on time, within budget, and meets its intended outcomes. Now, I'm going to pose this question to Mr. Ratiku because in his bio, I saw how the issue of social inclusion is important to him and I suppose his mandate in terms of his contribution to the construction industry. Now, Mr. Ratiku, what do you believe lies at the heart of this persistent underperformance, and where should we intervene to first shift the tide?
Thank you, Zama. That's quite a massive question, I must say. And I must say, if we all knew, we would have already addressed it. So whatever we give, it's our hypothesis around the reading of the situation. And let me be biased in answering this question because of my entity, perhaps. At the heart of persistence of poor performance lies resistance for people to acknowledge their gaps of performance. And those are professionals and all the stakeholders that are in the space. You seem to have lost me.
No, I'm back. You paused there for a bit, so I thought I had lost you, but I can hear you now.
Okay. So there are. Let me maybe start by indicating why we need to professionalize and link that with the improvement of performance in terms of project.
Yes.
We professionalize to increase public confidence, to ensure compliance with all our construction requirements. And we also professionalize to reduce the risk of the failure of our structures. Zama?
Yes,
are you still able to hear me?
I can hear you. I don't know if you're breaking or it's me, but I can hear you slowly so though.
Finish my point quickly. Maybe that will save the day. So I was speaking about the persistence of poor performance. There are a number of factors. I think some of them we've already touched on. Do we appreciate the forms of contracts that we are using currently? Do we understand the project delivery methods that we are implementing? And I know that we all academically speak in lingo and speak about the traditional procurement methods. Do we actually understand why do we have to separate those who are monitoring from those that are implementing? And what level of enforcement of monitoring principles should we put on the ground? We also understand the objectives of the projects that we are working on. Maybe those are some of the issues. And if you look at the issue that is a big elephant in the room of payments that I've heard from almost every tongue that started the discussion here. Why do we find it difficult to have a discussion of payment planning when we speak about our projects? All I see from projects that I'm involved in myself is that we speak about the payment terms, we speak about the intention to pay within a certain number of days, but do we actually have a plan that we all interpret and say, this is how your payment plan, Mr. Client, affects the delivery of my projects? One of the things that you may maybe advise, if you have seen, do we even do inductions of the forms of contracts that we are using before we start a project? And why don't we? Is there an assumption that everybody appreciates the forms of contracts that we are using? And it doesn't appear to be true. So I think we need to go back to the basics and say, when we start every project, let's assume that at best, if the contractor and the consultant knows the forms of contracts that we are using, let them demonstrate point to point on key or major clauses of the contracts to say, if we find ourselves in this type of debacle, this is how we are going to move out with this current contract. To an extent that we appreciate that it has got gaps and it might not take us to where we want to be. And what do we do before we even start those type of projects?
Thank you, Mr. Ratsiku, especially for, I really agree with that sentiment at the end around actually even inducting teams on the particular contract you will be applying for that particular project before the project starts. And if I may add, I think in my experience as a consultant, I had a client where, I was doing contract management services for them. But in the contract as a KPI, I had to, number one, do that induction session of the contracts we were using with his in-house, or the clients rather, in-house technical team, and every week I would have to workshop them on clauses that affect them. And just from experience from that particular client, what I realized is at the end of those projects, we had less contractual issues than one would normally see. That was, however, in the private sector. It could be something that I think we could look at actually implementing for the public sector as well. Completely agree with you on the professionalization and also understanding the objectives of the project. Now, just building on that, I'm going to go back to Mr. Kuseni. Many municipalities underperform on infrastructure spend due to a lack of in-house technical capacity. Now, from your experience, where do you think the biggest skills gaps are, and how can these be filled, particularly because you're also working for an institution that is, responsible for the development of the South African construction industry? Mr. Kuseni? Okay, I think we may have lost him. Do any of my panelists want to step in on this one?
Hi, Sama. Let me quickly try and jump in here.
Thank you, Lukhanya.
Yeah, so I think part of the problem, Mr. Kuseni touched on it, to say, there are projects that are ring-fenced for SMMEs 1 to 4, which generally do not have a construction background or any formal skill. And I think this is one of the areas that I really think we need to look at as an industry, and perhaps to the CEO of the CIDB to say, I think it is a big problem when it comes to project delivery. And simply because the guys do not have the skill and the know-how, yet there are rows of funds that sit to be spent without implementation of the project for the consumer. And this is where then I guess big industry, which would be your bigger entities, your grade 9s, then when are tasked to step in, we are seen as, call it, taking over opportunities for your smaller entities. And I think for me, Mr. Kuseni also touched on the build program, right? Because it's also partly incubation of SMMEs, and also, I guess, the build program in terms of upskilling your graduates in trying to address the unemployment issue. But then again, if you've got works that are ring-fenced for SMMEs 1 to 5, who's there to incubate them and ensure that the quality of that work is to a satisfactory standard, one that will ensure that it is in place for years to come, because it doesn't help that a project is completed and in 6 months we are back having to now do a maintenance contract when the original project was, I guess, in place to last for 10 years. So again, I think, yes, municipalities don't have the skill, but I also don't think the build program is addressing the capacity that is needed within municipalities. And even when you, I guess, bring in consultants, I think there is still, I guess, manipulation in terms of that onboarding process and that tendering process, which again reflects in these municipalities not being able to implement these projects to what we expect as the user.
Thank you so much, Lukhanya, for stepping in there. So in infrastructure delivery, we often focus intensely on breaking ground and reaching completion, but far less about what happens afterwards. And as a matter of fact, I had a student who did a study on the objectives of a particular rollout of projects that government had. And she was looking into whether those projects actually achieved the intended outcomes. And a finding from that study was that none of the objectives that were actually set for the project were met fully. So for me, it's an issue that we might have in the country. So for me, I would say the measure of success of a project, it's whether the project, over and above delivering the infrastructure, they would also meet the social, economic, as well as environmental benefits over time. And too often, these would fade just after the ribbon is cut for the handover of whatever infrastructure that we have just constructed. Now, Mr. Ratsiku, as we close this project management sub-theme, how would you say we can ensure that the long-term benefits are not only planned for, but are also tracked and sustained? Do you believe we are doing enough to embed post-project evaluation and benefits realization into the project lifecycle, particularly in the public sector? It's a mouthful.
Yeah, thanks, Zama. I'm sorry that all my answers are no today, right? Because this is a reflective session.
It's absolutely okay. Our program director did say 𝗔𝗫𝗄𝗏.
Thanks for that. So let me try to give you a simple reference to why, upon the end of implementation, the project team and its leaders run, and they don't seem to care or understand what a close-out stage is. You are dealing with people who are looking at bulk of projects, and in their view, the stages are 5. Once you have that building standing, run. And we need to correct that. Part of my proposition that may provoke unhappiness is maybe we need to look at the percentage of fees that we plug on what we call closeout phase. And we say from each stage, we go from 1 stealing 1%, 2 stealing 1%, and we end up with this closeout stage with 10% of fees out of the 6 stages. Why do I say that? If you put the very little at the end, why do you expect a natural human being who is capital orientated to care? The motivation becomes very low. And maybe we also need to think about the role of building up a portfolio of evidence at the end of each project, to an extent that it becomes a consideration in some of our procurement measures. To say you have claimed to complete this project in this particular area, give us a portfolio of evidence that includes up to stage 6 post-mortem of reflections. What have you done wrong? What have you learned out of it? What were your real successes? So that in case where people want to run away from projects, they know that they are leaving a milestone that matters behind. And maybe that will also enhance the due diligence of our clients to say, we are dealing with somebody who will close the project not only through the standing structure, but give us all the warranties, give us all the evidence of work done, and actually speak about the learnings that they are going to translate from project A to project B that we are able to give them now here. And maybe that will also enhance our doings and consideration of the reflections of close-out stage. Because for me, that's where it matters the most, that how do you avoid the mistakes that you've done from project C and make sure that they don't happen in project D, and practically speaking.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that response. I actually completely agree with your no at this with this response. And for me, I also think that it's not necessarily just about documenting and having those reports, but it should also be about institutional learning, where whatever is learned from one project, we find a way for people working on other projects to also learn from those lessons as well in terms of planning for the future. But in the interest of time, I really do not want to leave my audience out. So I'm going to move to the Q&A session. I don't know, I haven't checked if any questions have been posed. So thank you to my panelists, but let's just do this last leg of this panel discussion. Let me just have a look at the Q&As posed in the forum. Oh, there's 24 questions. All right, so we've only got 10 minutes. I am going to pick at random. So I see, I don't see really any questions posed for the panel discussion. Okay, there's one. There's a question from Benjamin Zelani, and he's talking about the theme of procurement. So the question here is, how is government protecting the construction industry in terms of non-built environment entering the industry, resulting in project failures and putting the strain on procurement processes in terms of underpricing and having to go on re-adverts to complete projects? When we see 𝗥𝗢, SACP, etc., databases can be linked with the CSD to ensure that submitted key personnel have consented to the submission to a particular bid. The issue is that there's a lot of misrepresentation in tender submissions to meet functionality criteria, and as a result, tenders proceed to the next evaluation stage with underpricing or lack of capability. The filtration of non-built environment professionals in the industry is also killing the skills or professional pipelines into the industry. This is quite a controversial one, but it speaks to the barriers to entry that we've got. So I don't know who of my panelists are well placed to answer this, but if anybody's willing to step in, I see Mr. Ratsiku has just enabled his video. So how are we protecting the construction industry in terms of non-built professionals coming in?
So let me answer it this way. The CPM Act, which is the basis of the existence of the SACP-CMP, says with clarity that a person who is not professionally registered is not supposed to practice as a, with bold, professional. So a non-registered person is not supposed to be called a registered person. It's not supposed to be called a professional. There are other places where they fit into play, rightfully so. Why is that so? To an extent that we are not only speaking about individuals that are going to be key personnel. The owner of the company of CPM Construction Project Management is supposed to be a registered professional. According to our act, if it's interpreted correctly, that's how controversial it gets. It doesn't speak about 100% or any percentage necessarily. Good practice is 50+1. Why is that important? How do we expect a non-professional definition by just simply being unregistered? To appreciate how they are supposed to disburse the fees to other professionals. How do they even interpret what those professionals are worth when they themselves are not in the space by academic qualification, by profession, meaning this accreditation certificate? It becomes difficult. That is why you find contracts that are running on stage 1 with a different consultant. The money has gone to Lamborghini. The client has to appoint the other consultant for stage 2. And you can speak about recourse, but the fact is that the industry suffers while you're busy addressing recourse. Yeah. Now, what have we done to address this? we have spoken to the client departments, public entities in particular, because that's where we have realized the gap, right? Those that you still see appointing what we are supposed to be referring to as professional service providers, who themselves are supposed to be professionals. They are not listening to us. They are not considering our act, but we have spoken to them. Now, let me speak about the misrepresentations of the CVs or CVs that are used without acknowledgement by the credential owners. Yeah. So the angle we have taken in addressing the client departments there is that there's, and I'm sure you are seeing this in small pockets in the industry, that each professional is supposed to acknowledge in writing that I know this bid. I have acknowledged that my certificate and my qualifications should be attached to us competing on this bid. Now, why are we failing to arrest that situation? Professionals need to understand that the day you release your certificate, you need to have measures of control of how to track how it will move across the industry. That's where we end, because we are not able to monitor that Zama has given 𝗘𝗅𝗧 her certificate, 𝗘𝗅𝗧 has passed it to Thabo. We are not that intelligent. But that's where it comes in as a professional to respect my credentials, to say, when I release my credentials, to what extent do I just pass them on without measures in place? If a professional has to have their own affidavit to say, I've released this, I've released it to this person, and I have it on records, let that be done, because what type of system will be able to track Zama, 𝗘𝗅𝗧, Thabo when they're exchanging certificates is difficult. But from clientele perspective, we are carrying on with those discussions. In fact, it's an ongoing discussion daily, and there must never be a situation where a person who's occupying a professional role, they themselves don't have a certificate, and there is an exchange of a person that the consultant shall have bid with, introducing another person without acknowledgement and enforcement by the client that this resource is being changed, and these are the reasons in writing. Those are the type of interventions that we are bringing. But we're going to take them further to be more stringent day by day. But it's a journey, because the industry also still have to survive, but the professionals themselves also need to be protected. But can I say this? Professionals also need to protect themselves.
Agreed. Agreed. Thank you, Mr. Ratsiko, for that answer. And then there's a question here for Lukhanyo. Mr. Echele, what is your view on the standard form of construction contracts and their ability to address weather claims, especially the JBCC and 𝗏𝗏𝗏 incorporating provisions which may provide for time but no compensation and additional time bar provisions?
Yeah, so I think it really then sits in you reading, I guess, the contract and the provisions that are made for weather. But again, you know, your weather claims are in place to protect you from delayed damages that the employer might pose in the event that your contract doesn't finish on time. However, again, you know, if your price point is not correct, you then carry additional cost which might not be compensated by the employer. So again, I think it is one of those items that you constantly need to engage, and you almost want to trade it off with the employer and his representative on a monthly basis to say, you know, I might not levy the claim now, but at least at the end of the project, you are not warranting any delayed damages. So yeah, it is in place to protect you from that, but I don't think if you have underpriced your bill, then I think you then carry that cost, unfortunately. And obviously, in circumstances where it is beyond what your limits are, then I think there is a payment, you know, time and cost that you can then levy to the employer, especially if really the conditions are beyond adverse.
All right. Thank you, Lukhanyo. This will be the last question I'm taking, and I will address it to probably Dr. Neil Govender because he is conversant with the tendering processes. Now, we've got a question from Mr. Prosperity Sibelehi, and he's asking, how does the government ensure fair process in assessing tender submissions, evaluation criteria, and compliance with terms and conditions?
So I think in terms of the tendering process, it's well laid out. CIDB has a document called the CIDB Standard for Uniformity in Infrastructure Procurement, and most of the public sector clients utilize that. I suppose in terms of fairness and ensuring that is actually used in terms of how it's prescribed in the documents, it would come back again to the clients that are deploying those contracts, the clients that are procuring the services or the construction firms. They need to have a good understanding in terms of what is required at the various stages, and ensure that the processes that are laid out, that they've prescribed in their tender documents, that they follow it out through to the fullest. And we see this in a number of contracts where there are discrepancies or contractors feel aggrieved that the process hasn't been followed. There is recourse in terms of the law. But I suppose, going that legal route and getting the outcome that you require, that's also, it's a very onerous process on whoever that aggrieved party is. And so I would say from the client perspective, it would be to have competent people in place who know about infrastructure procurement, who know how to deliver projects, so that when you are delivering projects, when you putting tenders out to the market, you're getting bids back, you're evaluating them fairly. The bidders that are submitting to you, they have confidence in the processes that are being undertaken. And that goes back to the points we spoke about earlier, Zama: transparency, giving visibility to tenderers. And I think once you have that in place, there's confidence in the market, things will start moving, and you will feel as the bidder that, this tender that you've submitted is undergone a fair process. When you see that, okay, company X has been appointed, you'll say, okay, well, you can see what the process is, who's won, you have visibility into the submission that they've made. Okay, unsuccessful this time, but you try again.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Govender. And as I bring this panel discussion to a close, I just want to appreciate all my panelists. You have really, really been amazing with your answers and very bold in some of these statements that you have made. We do know that real change, of course, doesn't end with just a discussion. So looking forward to the next webinar next year. Hopefully, we will be providing more solutions rather than discussing issues or problems at that time. I now want to hand over to my colleague, Ms. Upasna Narain, who will formally give a vote of thanks from our center and provide closing remarks for the webinar. I thank you all.
Everyone, good afternoon or almost afternoon. Thank you, Zama, for handing over to me. As we draw close to this webinar, it's my honor to deliver the vote of thanks on behalf of the WITS CIDB Center of Excellence for Sustainable Construction Industry Growth and our partners at the Construction Industry Development Board. Firstly, a heartfelt thank you to all our speakers and all our panelist members who have generously shared their time, insights, and experience with us today. To our program director, 𝗘𝗏𝗪𝗓𝗄𝗏, thank you for keeping us all in line, and to the program, To Prof. David Root, our acting head of school, thank you for setting the tone for this meeting this morning and grounding us in the objectives of the session. To Mr. Bongani Dladla, thank you for the warm welcome and for reaffirming the CIDB's continued commitment to transformation, development, and partnership in the sector. We are especially grateful to our Deputy Minister of Finance, Mr. 𝗘𝘅𝗰𝗲𝗏, for joining us and delivering a powerful opening address. His reflections on fiscal strategy and infrastructure delivery priorities provided an important context for today's discussions. Our keynote speaker, Professor Flanagan, thank you for helping us to situate South Africa's construction industry within the global trends and for challenging us to think critically about the competitiveness, innovation, and long-term growth in a smart way and in a futuristic way. To our distinguished panelists, Mr. Nkosi Kuseni, for spotlighting the real progress and remaining challenges around the procurement reform and at provincial levels. Mr. Lucanio Chele, for offering practical insights from the contractor's perspective on risk, compliance, and delivery. Mr. Lufuno Ratseku, for reminding us of the importance of capacity building and professionalism across the built environment. To Dr. Neil Govender, for grounding the conversation in research and real-world evidence from the infrastructure and procurement practice view. Finally, to our moderator, Dr. Zamagera Zungu, for steering the discussion so effectively and drawing out the core themes that define a way forward. This webinar has highlighted that rebuilding the construction industry is not just a technical or economic exercise. It is a collaborative effort that requires bold leadership, policy reform, and institutional strengthening with sustained dialogue amongst all stakeholders in the industry. Thank you to all our attendees for making time and who joined us this morning, those of you that posed questions and contributed to a vibrant exchange of ideas. Finally, we would like to extend our gratitude to the entire organizing team behind the scenes for ensuring the seamless running of this event. Let us take forward the energy and insights from today into our respective work environments. There is much to be done, and we have heard throughout the morning, collaboration is our strongest asset. Thank you all once again for taking time for joining us or to join us, and have a good day further.